can remember I had an old clunker of a car, and you could go into a gas station, ask for a buck's worth, got 5 gallons, right? Shows you how old I am, right? So 2 silver dimes would have done it, and maybe a silver quarter would get you that. Now here's a column that I saw years ago. I've forgotten the date on this thing. It's a long time ago. You've seen The Wizard of Id in your comic strips. What are you going to do about inflation? The crowd is yelling to the wizard. And he said, print more money. Well, we can't do that, sire. Why not? There's no more gold to back it up. He says, phew, for a minute I thought we were out of paper. Good lesson there. All right. Here's what we're using today. Federal Reserve note. You can look at the top of it, it says Federal Reserve note. Now, what is a note? Is a note money? No, a note is an IOU is a note, right? And we look at this same $20 bill, and it says it's Federal Reserve note, and it says it shall be redeemed in lawful money. But it's the only lawful money that the government has given the moniker of, the name for. So you're stuck with the Federal Reserve note, right? Now, the law says that a Federal Reserve note is legal tender. They've actually passed a law, said that this is legal tender and that you have to accept it. But the law would not be needed if the Federal Reserve notes were dollars, right? Because everybody would accept real dollars. And what's also interesting is that the Federal Reserve notes enjoy a monopoly, right? One of the things we don't like in the John Birch Society is monopolies. We don't like the concept of monopoly, we like competition. Now, if there were competition as legal tender in the money, who would take these instead of the competitor, which would be real money? So we see the value of the Federal Reserve for those who want to control us, and we know that we have to get back to real money, and of course that's one of the big goals of the John Birch Society. Where did the concept of money come from? It came, well, there was a barter situation. We go way, way back, and we find that in barter you need what is called a double coincidence of wants, right? If you are a shoemaker and you like eggs, you got to find a egg producer who needs shoes, right? And then you have barter. But if you don't find the right kind of guy, or you don't find the egg producer wants shoes, you might want to go to something else and use that as a kind of a go-between, a medium for exchange. So the whole concept of money developed not because some guy decided, okay, now we're going to have money. No, it was a natural consequence. And over the years, so many different things have been used as money. One of the examples that's used by some economists is the use of cigarettes by prisoners of war who, within the compound where they were housed and so forth, were trading for this and that, and cigarettes became money. Cigarettes became the medium for exchange. So the concept of money is not difficult to understand, but it's not being taught today, and it's one of the things that we would like to do. The founders of our country decided to define what a dollar was. And in the U.S. Mint Act of 1792, they actually came out and said that a dollar is 371.25 grains of silver. Now, how did they arrive at that? We don't know for certain. I suspect that what they did was they took a lot of the Spanish dollars that were available at the time that were being used, and if they had 10 of them, they weighed them, and then they divided what they got by 10, and it came out to 371.25 grains of silver. We don't use the term grains. We talk about grams, we talk about ounces and so forth, but grains is an amount, a physical amount, and it's a very small amount, as you can tell. So there is a definition of the dollar, and that's the only definition our government has ever given. And yet they take a piece of paper today and they stamp it and they say it says on it $1 or it says $20, and it's not, right? It's not dollars, it's not silver, it's not, so we got to get back to that definition. Now go to the Constitution, and you'll find two references to money in the Constitution, just two. The first one says, Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Okay. Congress shall have the power to coin money, right? You can't coin paper, right? So coining money, what they said was, Congress shall have the power to take the precious metals of the people, the gold or the silver that they've mined, or maybe some other stuff, platinum could be, copper, as we had copper pennies, obviously, and stamp them into coinage of a fixed size, weight, and purity, right? And that was actually the U.S. Constitution. And that, of course, became the law of the land in 1789. In 1792, Congress, acting on the power that was in the Constitution, created the U.S. Mint. And the U.S. Mint took the people's precious metals, fashioned them into coinage of a fixed size, weight, and purity, right? So now you had coinage that had the stamp of the U.S. government on it and said it was this amount of weight. It was an ounce coin. It was a half-ounce coin. It was something else. And that gave stability. And it gave a stability to the whole economic system in our country. And it's one of the main reasons our country took off. We now had decent, honest money. But the Congress of the United States didn't have a monopoly on doing this. Other people could coin money, right? And other people did. Now it also says regulate the value thereof. Well, regulating the value by 1 ounce coins, half-ounce coins, 1/10 ounce coins, and so forth. Another thing that was interesting is that they had Spanish pieces of 8 that were in use at the time. And the Spanish pieces of 8, if you've ever seen one, it's slotted. It looks like a pizza pie. It's got the slots in it. In fact, it was cut this way and that way and this way and that way, and you ended up with 8 pieces in the pieces of 8. Now, you could break them off, in fact. You didn't have to keep them as a coin. You could break off a piece here and a piece there. You would have 2 of them, and that was a quarter. It was 2 bits, right? That's where that phrase came from. 2 bits, or 2 of the 8 pieces in the pieces of 8, right? And then fix the standard of weights and measures. Well, there shall be 12 inches in a foot, there shall be so many feet in a yard, so many feet in a mile, and so on and so on. And in other words, we now had standards, and the Constitution of the United States required that. Now, one of the points that I love to make is that the Constitution says that Congress shall have the power to coin money, and that's all, right? I run into a lot of good people who say, well, you know, we got to get rid of the Federal Reserve and we got to get back to the government issuing the money. No, no. That's not what the Constitution says. It doesn't say that Congress shall have the power to issue money. It has the power to coin money. And it doesn't even have a monopoly in coining money. And that's a very important point. So when we pass out the exam here after this talk, you can't have lunch till you pass the exam, but right? We want everybody to realize that coin does not mean issue, okay? Now the Constitution also says, no state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, right? There's several interesting features of this. This is where you had the representatives of the 13 colonies, the 13 new states, that were very jealous guardians of state sovereignty and state powers, and they created a federal government with only limited powers, and they wanted to retain what they were willing to give up their ability to coin money for the common good. And it was a very generous move on the part of state leaders. So no state shall coin money. They didn't want anybody, any other government entity doing this. No state shall emit bills of credit. What's bills of credit? Bills of credit is paper money. They had had their experience with the Continental Congress and the Continental currency that was issued, even paid the troops during the War for Independence with Continental currency that was worthless, right? It was of absolutely no value. And it gave rise to a phrase that I used to hear my grandparents and my own parents use, that something was not worth a continental, right? And they weren't talking about the automobile, right? They were talking about the old, you don't hear that phrase much anymore, but it certainly conveys a good message. So nothing but gold and silver coin to tender in payment of debts, right? So no state can do that. Well, if no state can make anything but gold and silver coin and tender in payment of debts, then state power over what is tender in that state is still something that's present if you go to the Constitution of the United States, right? And we'll see that some states are starting to do that, Utah being one of them, and it's a very good development. I'm glad to see it, right? Now, what has happened to our currency? Here's two headlines. I got two of them. This is November 26, 2008, New York Times, and it's the lead article on the front page of the New York Times. U.S. plans $800 billion in lending to ease the crisis, right? And I highlighted one sentence, one portion of the first sentence in the article. They would print as much money as needed. I never thought I'd see that in the New York Times. I never thought I'd see that admission that here they were. But what really dismayed me is so many people read that article and said, well, obviously they had to do something, you know. They didn't see the wrongness of it, right? If you print a lot of money, where does it get its value? It gets its value by taking a little value from all existing money. And that's what's happening in inflation. That's what inflation is all about. So that was November 26th of 2008. And the article was by a guy named Edwin Andrews, all right? Well, March 9th, 2009, that's only a few months after that, he writes another article. Fed will inject $1 trillion more to aid the economy. And I highlighted a way of getting more dollars into the economy, a tactic that amounts to creating vast new sums of money out of thin air, right? Right? So even the New York Times is telling us what they're doing, but hardly any Americans reading that understood how dangerous it was, how harmful it was. One of the things we try to do in the Birch Society is we even take what the enemy is saying, and the enemy is the New York Times. Now this article is again by this guy, Edwin L. Andrews. He's not writing for the New York Times anymore, right? And maybe the guy that allowed this to get published isn't his editor. His editor, maybe he's gone too, I don't know. But they don't want the American people to know what is really happening to their dollar. If we go back to the foundation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, yeah, we didn't have a Federal Reserve from the beginning of our country. It started in 1913, when the dollar was worth 100 cents, and now it's worth 2 cents. And maybe a little bit under 2 cents, right? It's heading towards zero, and if it ever hits zero, we're in deep trouble. Now here's another concept that has been lost. Wealth is not a pile of stocks and bonds and securities and pieces of paper. Wealth is productivity, right? A nation is a wealthy nation that has a manufacturing base, a mining base, agricultural base, right? In other words, you take the raw materials of the earth, you can create them into goods. That's wealth, right? The stocks and the bonds and the pieces of paper, that's a manifestation of wealth. That's not the wealth itself. So what we would like to have in our country is a country that is making products that we need and finding them in the earth and producing the foods and so forth, all right? Ladies and gentlemen, our manufacturing base has shrunk from a 20 million level 25 years ago down to 12 million people in manufacturing today. Where did all that manufacturing go? Where did all those jobs go? Well, you know where they went. A lot of them went to Mexico, and many of them went to China. And even some of the ones that went to Mexico ended up in China, right? And it continues, right? And they keep saying, well, we're just about out of the recession now. Oh yeah? Oh yeah? When is the manufacturing base going to start rebuilding? When are we going to start producing what we need rather than having to get it from somebody else, right? Now here's the national debt as of the 27th of April, 2012. That's what? That's 2 weeks ago, right? $15 trillion. Some of you have seen a DVD that we produced called Dollars and Cents that I did only 4 years ago, or maybe it was 5, I don't know. But in that DVD, I talk about how horrible it is that the national debt is now $9 trillion. Right? And you can see how fast it's rising, because now it's 15, and that was 2 weeks ago. We're heading right towards 16. We're going to get there before the election in November. We'll hit $16 trillion. What's $1 trillion? Right? It's incomprehensible. Just think about the number, 12 zeros. What does it mean? A trillion equals 100 billion. 1,000 billion. Or it equals 1 billion million. Or it equals, I'm losing 1 billion thousand, right? It's just incomprehensible, right? You start talking about what is a trillion and you lose people. Well, what comes after trillion? Well, then quadrillion, then quintillion, all right? Are we headed that way? Well, yeah, Zimbabwe headed that way, right? They were taking million and billion dollar notes in Zimbabwe, and with a rubber stamp, they were just saying, no, now it's a quadrillion, now it's a quintillion. Maybe you saw about some of the hardships that the people in Zimbabwe went through. Zimbabwe is now using the US dollar as its national currency. And they're suffering the same things. All right, now we had a recession here, didn't we, huh? We had a recession, and President Obama came into office, and he appointed his economic team. His economic team included Timothy Geithner as the Treasury Secretary, and Lawrence Summers as the Director of the National Economic Council, and Paul Volcker as the Chairman of the Economic Recovery Advisory Board. All right? All three of them just happened to be members of the Council on Foreign Relations, which meant that we weren't going to get much of a solution. We might even get the problem worse. All right? Now, Summers and Volcker have backed away from their job. Geithner's still there, but the men who replaced Summers and Volcker, they're of the same genre. So, you know, Volcker is the guy, when he was the head of the Fed, they have a kind of a song and dance routine that they go for. Somebody goes and tells the president, we want you to appoint this fellow as the head of the Federal Reserve, so he does. And then they have to go before the U.S. Senate for confirmation, and they go and the song and dance continues. They always get confirmed, right? And during his confirmation, Volcker actually stated, he said, the standard of living of the average American has to go down. I don't think you can escape that. I remember saying to myself, well, thank you very much, Mr. Volcker. I'm glad to hear your opinion, and I'm sure that you will work hard to make that happen, right? He did. And his successor did, Alan Greenspan, and his successor's doing it, Ben Bernanke, all right? Now let's take a look here. If you wanted to solve the problem, you would look around and find out, well, what happened in other countries, and did they solve the problem, okay? So we see Japan, that in the late 1980s and into the first couple of years of the 1990s, Japan was boomtown. Japan was everything. Japan actually bought Rockefeller Center in New York City, right? They bought golf courses out on the West Coast. They bought other things. They had money flowing everywhere. They were doing beautifully, everything. And all of a sudden, their bubble burst, as bubbles do burst, right? Right? And it burst because of the same reasons that our bubbles have been bursting, all right? So Japan decided to take care of their recession in 1992. What did they do? Well, they had all kinds of fiscal stimulus packages. They increased the money supply. They cut the interest rates. They had public works spending. They bailed out corporations that were failing. And they designated some too big to fail. We have to keep them in business, right? Now, if that sounds familiar, that's why I put it on the screen, right? 20 years later, Japan is still in the recession. 20 years later. What did our government do? Geithner, Summers, and Volcker did exactly what Japan did, and the results here in America are no better, right? At the end of World War I, there was a recession. It actually started in mid-1920. But in the 1920 elections, a man named Warren Harding was elected President of the United States. When he came to office, the United States was in a deep recession because of World War I. And so President Harding did absolutely nothing to address the problem. And in a year and a half, the United States was out of the Depression. I had a fellow recently call me, he's running for Congress, and he said, I was asked recently what I wanted to do when I got to Washington. What would you do if you got elected and went to Washington? He said, I think I answered the question correctly, but he said, how would you have answered that question? I said, it's very simple. I would tell him, I'm not going to Washington to do anything. I'm going to Washington to undo a lot of things, right? And he said, wow, that's my answer from now on, right? I don't know if he'll get elected or not, but it's a good line to know, and it's a good line that that's what needs to be done, right? So the actions it's guaranteeing that the recession isn't going to end. They're doing everything that Japan did. All they had to do was look at Japan, and they could have seen that, no, we don't want to go down that route because they're still in the deep problem. Okay. Now here's a little look at the national debt. This is after the presidency, all right? Jimmy Carter was president for 4 years, and when he left office, the debt was $0.930 trillion. Now, Ronald Reagan came to office, and he was going to do everything. We started a campaign soon after Ronald Reagan came to office, said no trillion-dollar debt. We don't want to go that far. Ronald Reagan said he was going to cut government. He didn't, right? All right, so he was in office 8 years, and when he left office, the national debt was now $2.6 trillion. And then George Bush the first came along, and it went up to $4.1 trillion, and he was only in office 4 years. Then Bill Clinton came along, and Bill Clinton, surprisingly, is less damaging than these other presidents as far as the national debt was concerned. He was in office 8 years, and when he left, it was $5.6 trillion. And then Bush II, George W. Bush, he's in office 8 years, it rose to $10.6 trillion. And then Obama, at the end of his 3 years, and of course now we're into more than 3 years because it's now May, but after only 3 years, it's up to 15.1, and I've shown you already it's 15.6 and going up even higher. So you can see that our leaders are not going the way we would like to see them go, and reducing the national debt and getting this off the backs of the American people, and especially our children and grandchildren, right? Here's a chart of the national debt growth, right? During Reagan years, it was 2.7 billion. Bush won, he raised it 1.5 trillion. Again, these figures all should be trillion. Clinton, 1.5 trillion. Bush 2, 5. Obama, 4.5 billion in 3 years. So you can see Obama's the worst of the lot. This is interesting, the debt relative to the gross domestic product. You got Carter, had a debt that was 33% of the gross domestic product. You see it keeps going up, up to Obama, 99.7. So now the debt is equal to the gross domestic product. In other words, we owe as much money as is produced in our country in the wealth production every single year, right? And it's now past 100%. They just had an article recently that the Obama administration has passed the 100% level, and now the debt is higher percentage-wise. Now, the Obama budget for fiscal 2013 is 3.8 trillion. This is where we are right now, right? The Obama budget, 3.8 trillion. The Obama budget for fiscal 2013, that same year, says that they're going to take in 2.5 trillion in receipts. All right, so a little arithmetic here. U.S. bond rating, because of what's going on, has been lowered for the first time in our nation's history from AAA to one level below that. It's now no longer AAA. And I suspect that it's going to go down even more. Now, if we look at the same kind of rating systems, we see that the government bonds in Greece are now considered junk, right? And we've all seen it in the newspapers that Greece is in a heavy financial condition, right? Very serious. But the U.S. debt is 32 times what the Greek debt is. 32 times. Is there a lesson there? Yeah. Let's go back to the Obama budget. All right? They say they're going to spend 3.8, and that always goes up, by the way. They say they're going to take 2.5 trillion in receipts. That's the taxes that they get in all different ways. So they got a $1.3 trillion deficit, right? Planning to have a $1.3 trillion deficit in a single year, right? And $1 trillion is just an immense amount of money, obviously, right? All right, now, so how do they spend the money, right? We saw how much they're planning to spend. Well, they spend it for entitlements. That's interest on government bonds, it's Social Security payments, it's Medicare, it's pensions for the military and government employees and so forth. And, so the entitlements turn out to be greater than the amount of taxation that they're taking in, right? So there's nothing left to run the government except borrowing. And this is good leadership. This is the way you run a business. No, it's the way you run a government, obviously. But you don't want that. Okay, now, so how do we solve the problem? Well, here are some of the suggestions that are being made. Some of them good, some of them not so good. All right? You can raise taxes 50%. You can cut entitlements. You'd have a lot of older people screaming and yelling about that. Cut the size of federal programs. That would be a good one, right? Repudiate the debts. No, I'm not in favor of that, but I understand that there's a fairly sensible proposal being made for repudiation of debts that were incurred for unconstitutional programs. Right? That's shaky ground to cover there. Now, the Republican plan that has been offered as an opponent of the Obama plan, it still calls for $1 trillion deficit. It says that the balanced budget is not going to occur for many, many years. In fact, they're even talking about into the 2020s and even up to the 2040s before the Republican plan will balance the budget. Right? So the Republican plan isn't much better. Right? Go back to what the Constitution says. No state shall coin money. All right? If a state can't coin money, is there anything a state can do? So some states are taking action. And this, to me, is a very healthy development. Here in Utah, no more taxation on gold or silver purchases, right? Now, that's significant. If you want to trade in your Federal Reserve notes for some gold or silver coins, why should you have to pay a sales tax on it when you know that the Federal Reserve note is only a note and it's not a real piece of money, and you have to pay a sales tax to get real money when the currency is supposed to be backed by real money to begin with? Well, that was a very good move on the part of Utah. And other states are starting to think about that. In South Carolina, the House has okayed gold and silver as money. They've said in our state, gold and silver is legal tender. And that is also a very healthy development. Other states are moving this way. And I'm very happy to see it. I know it's going on in Virginia. I know I think it's being considered in Idaho and several other places. So the states are beginning to say we can't rely on this money system that the federal government has given us. We've got to take some alternatives. And I agree, some alternatives have to be made. Now, a bad solution that's being recommended by the high and the mighty, the Council on Foreign Relations types and so forth, is why don't we just scrap the dollar and we'll have a new currency, United Nations issue the new currency from the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, or some other United Nations agency. Ladies and gentlemen, if you give up your money system, you're giving up a major portion of your sovereignty, right? And keep that in mind. We certainly don't want this. We don't want to get entangled any further into the United Nations. All right, so here's what's needed. Here's what's really needed. Abolish unconstitutional departments and programs. Abolish the legal tender law that gives the Federal Reserve note a monopoly. No, get rid of it. Right? Restate the dollar's definition, that it is a weight of silver. Allow private coinage. Now, when I say allow private coinage, there are people come to me, said, you want Joe Schmo down the street here to get a little mint and start producing coins? How do you know that he's going to give you a coin that says it's 1 ounce of silver, but it's really got some base metal in it, and he's cheating you? I said, well, you know, that could happen. And what's your recourse? Take them to court. That's fraud, right? But if you want to stay with the system we got, instead of one little guy defrauding some people here or there, you got everybody being defrauded by the Federal Reserve, right? So what do you choose? Well, obviously you choose taking the chance with a little guy here and a little guy there. So I'm in favor of private coinage. I like the idea. I would like to see more of it. And if we got back to that and we got the government under control, then we could eventually cancel the income tax. Anybody here in favor of that? All right, now those were things that are needed. And here's a fellow who's come up with a program. It's exactly what's needed, right? He says abolish departments. He actually put out an economic plan. I have it. It's about 8 or 10 pages long, right? And he says abolish departments. And he names the ones to abolish: energy, housing and urban development, commerce, interior, education, right? And he says end foreign aid. Well, if you're heavily in debt, should you give away money? I mean, isn't that logical? I mean, I've told audiences, I went to a fourth grader recently, and I said, if you're heavily in debt, should you give away money? And the fourth grader said, of course not. I said, well, how'd you like to run for Congress, right? Ron Paul wants to abolish the TSA, the Transportation Security Authority, right? And what he says is very simple. Let the airlines provide the security, right? This hotel provides security for the people who use the hotel. Then why can't an airline be told, all right, you provide the security for, so if the airlines set up a system to make sure that nobody's getting on the plane with a bomb, do you think it would be as intrusive as what the federal government is doing to all of us today? No, it certainly would not. And then, of course, Ron Paul eventually canceled the income tax, right? All right. Now, here's Paul Ryan's economic plan. He's the new hero of the neocons in Congress, right? Paul Ryan's economic plan. He's a congressman from Wisconsin, right? And his doesn't balance the budget until 2040. Right? It's only 2013. Right? We're going to have unbalanced budget. We'll get more debt, more debt, more debt, all the way up till 2040. Right? His plan doesn't eliminate any departments. And there are stalwart members of the House, the GOP members of the House, who voted no to Paul Ryan's economic plan, said it's not good enough. But he's the darling now of the TV commentators and the Sunday morning interview shows and a lot of others. Right? Paul Ryan, I don't want to say he's a bad man. I just think he's certainly not an economist in my view. Right? Okay. Now, Congress is stirring. At least there are some people in Congress who are making some sense. We see H.R. 4180, the Sound Dollar Act, right? Introduced by Representative Brady from Texas and a senator named Lee from Utah. You folks know who that is, right? All right, this is a good act, right? It faces a lot of hurdles, right? But at least somebody in Congress is stirring. stirring. This wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, right? And then you've got H.R. 1098, the Monetary Reform Act by Representative Ron Paul, which is much better than the other one, but Ron Paul is, his methods are too extreme. And people say, oh, no, we can't do that, we can't do that. Well, obviously that's what we should do. But if we could at least do what Brady and Lee are suggesting, that would be good. So write those numbers down, H.R. 4180, and get your congressmen, get your senators to start looking at that. All right? All right, now, we got a lot of bad news in this talk. Right? The economic news is not what you'd call a rosy picture or something that would make you feel good or get a warm glow. Right? So there is a plan for victory. And this is the John Birch Society's plan for victory. Not only the economic situation, but all these other situations. And it goes back to the Constitution. We take our country back through the House of Representatives. We encourage people to be careful and do not expect to steal the presidency, right? Obviously, there's somebody that all of us would like to see in the White House. The chances of that happening are very slim. But so we got to have a plan beyond that very slim chance. And that's go back through the House of Representatives. Why? Why do we say go back through the House of Representatives? Because the Constitution tells us that all bills for raising revenues shall originate in the House of Representatives. So if the House of Representatives does not initiate a bill to fund the Department of Education, foreign aid, undeclared wars, this or that or something else, that's it, right? As long as the Constitution still stands. And right there I'm putting in a plug for no con-con, right? We don't want a constitutional convention that would probably destroy this part of the Constitution. So if the House of Representatives refuses to originate a bill to fund the Department of this and the Department of that, there's nothing the Senate can do it. There's nothing the President can do. There's nothing the Supreme Court can do. And there's nothing the New York Times can do, right? Right? There's the power of the purse in the House of Representatives. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to make sure that whoever represents you in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. is the right kind of American. It may even be far more important than who gets into the White House. Right? There's your marching orders. All right. Now, is there any hope here? Well, yeah. Here's Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society. I don't know how many times I heard him say this or he wrote it. He said, withdraw the United States from the United Nations and you will have broken the back of the insider-controlled conspiracy against civilization. In other words, get us out. Right? All right, now, it has always been understood that refusal to pay dues is equivalent to wanting withdrawal. Right? So let's look at some votes that have been held in the Congress of the United States. In 1997, there was an actual vote in the House of Representatives to withdraw from the United Nations. Just formally withdraw. And I remember when that vote came up, I was thinking, we were asking each other, how many do you think will vote for it? I think the most that anybody said was 20. There were 54 members of the House who voted for that. It's not enough, right? Even to pass the House, you'd need a majority of 218. So in 1999, there was a vote to cease funding, and immediately the people who are pro-UN in the House of Representatives, well, you want to get out. You want to cease funding. That means you want to get out. And some of the people behind that saying, yep, that's right. That's right. That's how we're going to do it, right? So there were 74 votes in 1999. And in 2003, there were 74 votes to cease funding. And in 2004, there were 83 votes. You can see where we're going here? We're going up, right? All right, now, in 2011, a little more than a year ago, early in the current session of the U.S. Congress, there was a vote to withdraw funding from the United Nations. Right? So I want you all to think to yourself, how many do you think would have voted for it in 2011? Right? Now, obviously, we're going up. Right? How far up are we going? Right? Ladies and gentlemen, 177. 218 needed. All right? So 23 and 18, 41 more, the House of Representatives would have voted against funding. And if they're voting against funding, then they have the power of the purse, the House of Representatives, and they can stop. And if we go back to what Robert Welch said, withdraw the United States from the United Nations, you have broken the back of the insider control conspiracy against civilization. If you get out of the UN, you've got people in Congress who will abolish the Federal Reserve, who will stop undeclared wars, who will do this, who will do that, who will get back to the Constitution, and the United Nations can be the key. So what do we say? Isn't that a beautiful billboard? We say, get us out of the United Nations. That billboard is in Arizona, right? Halfway between Tucson and Phoenix. I've driven past it. I got out and I took a look at it and I felt like genuflecting. So get us out is so important. And you know, we've kind of put that on a little bit of a back burner recently in the Birch Society. We got to get it back. We got to get the people talking about it and doing it and give them materials that will help other people to understand why we should get out of the United Nations. If you go back ever since World War II, when we first got in the UN at the end of World War II, we see Korea, we see Vietnam, we see the first invasion of Iraq, we see the invasions of Iraq again, and then Afghanistan, we see incursions into Bosnia, Herzegovina, we see Somalia, we see this. Every one of those was a UN operation, and that's not well known, right? If we make it known, then we will see that there will be more people who will agree with us about getting us out of the United Nations.
All right, everybody, we have over 50 people registered. And so at this time, we will, we're still waiting for our speaker. He said he's going to arrive about 5 minutes before we start. So we're going to play another video. And just so you know, I'm doing this to teach all of you that are members of the John Birch Society to be doing it on your own. This is what members need to be doing. Those who are not going out to group meetings, if you can't meet in groups in your area, you need to be conducting webinars like this on your own, because this is how we spread the education that the John Birch Society has. So I hope all of you that are watching this will consider being a person that does your own webinar and invites John Birch Society national speakers as your speaker for the webinar, because that's truly how we're going to win this battle. Truth is our only weapon, and education, education is our total strategy, and truth is our only weapon. That's how it's said in the John Birch Society. So anyways, I'm going to play one more video for us here before this all starts. I hope you all are having a great day. Today is tax day, so some of you have probably paid your taxes and you're wondering what you're getting for your taxes, and guess what? We are getting a lot of debt for our taxes. So anyways, I'm going to talk about that when Mr. McManus is here with us. So anyways, I'm going to play another video, share it, and then after the video, we will get going.
Bananas grow on trees.
True! True or false? Chameleons change their color to match their environments.
Well, I shared the wrong browser. Hold on here just a second here. We'll start this over here.
Even though many believe these things to be true,
True or false? Bananas grow on trees.
True! True or false? Chameleons change their color to match their environments.
True. True or false? The Great Wall of China can be seen from space.
True!
Houston, we have a problem.
Even though many believe these things to be true, experts have pointed out that these are simple misconceptions. Have you heard the saying, if you're told something enough times, you're sure to start believing it?
The same can be said for a person, company, or organization. For example, when the John Birch Society is mentioned, some respond in a negative way. If you ask why they feel that way, most can't explain. So why is this? In order to really understand, we need to go all the way back to when the society began.
A man named Robert Welch founded the John Birch Society in 1958. He believed the only way America could maintain its sovereignty and freedom was by promoting less government and more responsibility. He also believed that this would require exposing the socialists, communists, and other collectivists who always work for more government and less responsibility. In a speech given in 1961, Mr. Welch emphasized the importance of restoring the U.S. Constitution and avoiding democracy. His slogan was, "This is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way."
He truly believed that with God's help, these principles would help create a better world. His ideas quickly gained support and members, and with its growing momentum, the society began to attract national attention. Of course, not all of that attention was positive. In 1961, the Communist Party's West Coast newspaper, People's World, put out an article entitled, "Enter, from Stage Right, the John Birch Society."
Naturally, the communists portrayed the anti-communist John Birch Society as a dangerous organization created by the absolute boss, Welch, who was busily employing the cell method to create a following across the nation. They deliberately misled their readers by using the communist term cell instead of the actual term chapter, which is what the society calls a group of local members.
People's World even attacked